What's up, y'all? Kicking off this year's new SLS season, we have a brand new introduction of what's referred to as the Apex Stops. These spot-based events take heavy inspiration from the previous Resurrection events for Hubba Hideout in 2022 and the Wilshire 15 in 2023. This year, we're slated to get 3 of the spot-based events spaced along the normal tour stops, with the first one taking place indoors at the UFC Slapbox Tournament Room, showcasing an inspired recreation of Beverly Hills 9 Stair. Notably, this rail was seen in Appleyard's Really Sorry, Chris Cole's New Blood, and Paul Rodriguez's Me, Myself, and I parts, with the bonus obstacle being the Hubba across the gap, which in hindsight was absolutely useless, but we'll get to that. Unfortunately, our big boy Nyjah was swiftly taken out by Cactus prior to the event and was unable to make it, along with SLS alumni and April Skateboards owner Shane O'Neill with his own injuries, giving Ryan DeCenzo and Felipe Mota a chance to take their spots last minute. This event itself is pretty self-explanatory in a sense that it's literally just a best trick contest with only 7 attempts. Now, unlike the Resurrection events, where it plays out more like a jam session with skaters not receiving scores and having as many chances as they want to attempt a trick, the Apex format is far more routine and restricted and doesn't allow for half as much creativity and expression from the skaters. Instead of being able to work out a couple tricks in a few tries and feel out the spot, this event comes across as the best trick section from a normal SLS stop, but with 2 extra tries and the big section only. With only 3 scores being kept and the highest score breaking the tie, we have a pretty straightforward expectation of skaters doing their usual hammers. Braden Hoban with his impossible frontside nose grind and Liz Akama with her signature barley grind back to regular took the highest scoring tricks for both men's and women's division. However, only Liz and her 7.1 were able to secure a podium place, with Braden's 9.5 unfortunately being worthless with only landing 2 out of 7 tricks. Out of the 14 total skaters across both men's and women's sessions, about a third of them were unable to land more than 3 tricks in general, leaving them with no chance of really placing on the podium amongst other skaters. Now, this obstacle was made to be skated for both men and women skaters alike, so it's no surprise that the difficulty of tricks was more proficient in that of the men's, as their age and skill level is nearly 6 years higher than that of the women's. However, across both divisions, Rue Zeltswoot was able to land more tricks down the handrail than any other skater of the night. More than likely not being too familiar with handrails of this height, and despite landing 5 tricks, she just played it a little too safe and was unable to get a score high enough, leaving the win to Liz Akama and her only 3 landed tricks just being high enough for no one else to pass. Given her previous trick selection in Paris 2024, it's no surprise that these handrails were within her wheelhouse, giving the 2nd and 3rd spot to Wenhu Zhang and Po Pinson, each of which also landed just enough tricks to secure a podium, with Zhang snagging 2nd on her 6th trick, a backside tail slide on a round handrail no less, getting into 6.5. Now, I amongst others thought this trick was horribly scored and should have gotten a higher score than Liz Akama's signature barley drag. However, it would have to be a 7.3 to break her tie with the highest scored trick, as we'll see later with the men's. Now, despite Hoban landing the best scoring trick, he wound up with the lowest score overall amongst the other 7 men's skaters, showing 9 clubs only matter if you make the minimum trick requirement in the long run for the men's division. It's not really shocking either that the men were far more willing to show out, as I'm sure all of these skaters consider a 9-stair handrail their basic warm-up for the streets, especially when you compare it to something like the Barracks 10-stair, which I'm sure is all something they've skated at least once in their life, which can be notably seen in our top 3 skaters throwing a hefty amount of their signature best tricks down the spot. Since he was unable to make an appearance in the Paris 2024 stop, Yuto was practically contractually obligated to show up and destroy everyone's hopes and dreams, having landed only 3 of his 4 tricks, with each of them being in the 9 club. With opting to not flip his board a single time, Yuto gracefully breezed through to the top spot, leaving Felipe Gustavo and Alex Miller to fight over 2nd and 3rd. Now, according to rules, any tie is broken by the highest scoring single trick, and this rule was actually seen in effect on the first stop for us to see in action. In the 7th and last attempt, Felipe was able to land an ollie flip frontside board and secure a 9.0, but only after Miller was able to pull out a backside 270 flip board slide to snatch a 9.4, which is inevitably the tiebreaker. Although this is a rule that was set and rewarded Alex with the 2nd, I feel the overall score is much more appropriate to go off of, especially when considering that Felipe Gustavo had the highest total score amongst all 8 male skaters across all 4 of his tricks landed, which going off total score earned, he had Miller beat by 0.2 points. However, I will argue that Miller's backside 270 flip board slide probably should have received a 9.6, since I personally feel it's much harder than that of Braden Hoban's impossible nose grind, and if it had received a 9.6, he would have given him the highest score and break the tie with Yuto, giving Miller the win. Just another example of how fairly questionable judging can result in a monumental shift in terms of placing, as Yuto's complete avoidance of flip tricks was not a punishable offense, yet Miller's trick selection was just not impressive enough to earn those 0.3 points needed to definitively take first place. This being said, with both Liz Akama and Yuto Horigami first place wins in the first Apex stop for 2024, we now have a clear picture of just how this event will go down and what to expect from these skaters. Simply being the best trick section, of a normal SLS match with 2 extra tries instead of 2 lines, it's fair to say that any skater who's proficient in their single tricks will have an easier shot at taking the top spot. That being said, these Apex stops seem to have taken the formula from the Resurrection events and squeezed all the soul and enjoyment out of it. No longer focusing on creativity and ability, these Apex stops will be purely about consistency and repetitiveness, as seen with Liz Akama's winning tricks being her signature moves, with the same being said of that of Yuto and his 3 winning tricks as well. Only time will tell if the 2 events are just as dull as the first one, and hopefully they design a more versatile spot, as the Hubba featured in this one was more than an afterthought for most skaters. With only 7 out of 98 tricks total being attempted or landed on the Hubba whatsoever, it was clear that this obstacle was just pointless in hindsight, as most skaters couldn't even be bothered to touch it. We'll see what other spots they put together in the next 2 weeks, but keeping in mind they scale for both men and women to use, it's hard to say that I expect much to change in terms of performance from either side. Personally, I'd love to see a more versatile spot like the Brooklyn Banks or something like the New York Pyramid Ledges would be interesting, as these high drops and large handrails are going to get real boring real fast, considering we've seen enough of them in the regular SLS events already. With that, we have the conclusion of the second stop and the first of 3 Apex locations. Only time will tell just how these events play a factor, as the points earned here count toward the total ranking for who's going to the finals. Theoretically speaking, if Yuto only shows up to these Apex events and wins every single one, he can make it to the finals without ever having to skate a normal SLS event. Definitely an interesting addition, as I feel this only validates how single trick heavily focused SLS has really become. Whether or not this is intentional due to the Olympics events choosing to make 45-second runs their focus, or just a coincidence to host additional quick and small best trick events, one thing remains, and it's that our next event will be a typical SLS event taking place on San Diego on April 20th, so as long as Niger doesn't get taken out by another green plant, we'll just have to see how this one goes compared to Paris 2024. Thanks for entertaining my opinions, appreciate the view, and stay pushing.
All around me are familiar faces, worn out places, worn out faces, riding early for their daily races.